All right, everybody, welcome back. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, with another K-12 politics and tech update. As always, here with Kevin Gordon. Kevin, nice to have you back.
Yep, good to be back, Tim.
Yeah, and we have one of our frequent and favorite guests with us, Governor Bob Wise, who's got some federal news for us. So, Governor Wise, pleasure to have you as well.
Good to be back with you all.
Yeah, and Governor Wise, let's start with you. I mean, we've been looking for the stimulus package and the help that schools desperately need, and lo and behold, it looks like we didn't get what we were hoping for. Maybe you can just kind of fill us in on what you saw and any additional news that we might need to hear.
So, Tim and Kevin, this pains me greatly, but I brought some silverware. And the reason I brought it is so that I can eat a lot of the words that I have said on these various broadcasts and predictions that I've made in times past about how Congress could not leave Washington, D.C. for the August recess without passing another stimulus package. The political, economic, and education pressures would be too much. I'm eating my words because this is an empty Capitol behind me, and Congress has left for the August recess without passing a major stimulus package or any stimulus package. So let's quickly rehash and what does this mean for school leaders. So Congress has left the Senate until I believe September the 8th and the House until September the 14th. And the now they can be called back at any time. They left those provisions so that technically negotiations between the House and Senate leaderships and the different parties and the White House can take place. When they left, and this was a day or so ago, they left yelling at each other, and there were no negotiations scheduled to take place. Hopefully that could change, but at this point, there is no federal stimulus package that affects education. I think it's important to recognize that when they left, there was a House bill that had passed a couple of months ago called the HEROES Act, had $3.2 trillion in it, of which roughly $100 billion for education between K-12 and higher ed, bulk of it going to K-12. The Senate had actually upped the ante and had proposed $75 billion for K-12 alone in its version. However, that all got left on the negotiating room floor. They when they reached an impasse, and their impasse was not over education. It was over how much would be funded for further unemployment, which the expanded unemployment benefits expired at the end of July. How much for unemployment, and also how much to assist businesses through the Paycheck Protection Act and other measures. What happened was when they reached an impasse, the president signed several executive orders. Some question his authority to sign them, but what it did was it took the pressure off. And it took the pressure off the Republicans in the Senate, and it took the pressure, and it also gave them a chance to say, the president's taking care of the most immediate needs, and we don't have to meet the concerns, and nor do we have to negotiate further. At the end, Speaker Pelosi of the House had offered to come down $1 trillion from $3 trillion. If the Senate would come up $1 trillion, and they'd meet in the middle, and that was rejected. So, what does this? What the president's executive orders, as I say, they could or could not, depending on whom you talk to, have an impact on workers. They could have an impact on some businesses, but they will not have an impact. It will not have an impact on education. So that also means that the provisions that were still in effect for district leaders continued. One thing that district leaders do not have to contend with, at least this month, is remember that some of the discussions in stimulus package would have said 2/3 of the money goes to schools that physically reopen, and schools that don't effectively there'll be a disincentive if they engage in distance learning. That has not gone into effect because there's no legislation on it. Second one that does stay in effect, and it's significant for district leaders, the provisions from the from the CARES Act that Secretary DeVos implemented, the Equitable Services Act, or Equitable Services Regulation, that says you have to allocate more money for private schools. That does remain in effect. No legislation was changed. So and also what did nothing was done about, nothing was acted on is digital access, broadband access, and providing devices for students, low income students. So we're with almost every major school district in the country still opening under distance learning, there's no money to assist students, low income families, uh, with the kind of broadband that they need. I do want to note that, can this change? I think that I have a feeling you're going to ask me that question, Kevin. So let's look at the schedule that the Congress is operating under. It's out. It can be called back if the leadership reach an agreement with the White House. Uh, but otherwise, it doesn't come back until September the 8th for one house, September the 14th for the other. It'll be in session for about 3 weeks. This is an election year. They want to get out, and they have to pass the number of appropriation bills necessary for the budget. There's not much room or time for a stimulus package. And what concerns me is the extent that they come back and decide we got a lot of pressure on unemployment, but will they then be willing to take on some of the other issues around education? So with each week that passes, it gets harder and harder to see a significant stimulus package for education. What could change that? Here's why I am optimistic sometimes. What could change that is, as members of Congress are at home over August, as they see their school districts opening, as they see their children, their grandchildren, their constituents' children, they see the pressures they're operating under, and they're hearing firsthand what the impact is. That could cause them to make sure their leadership knows that they want to see some action. But that's unknown right now, and what is also unknown is the impact of millions of students, many millions of parents and grandparents and others staying at home yet another month, 2, 3 months, another semester, when they expected they'd all be back in school, that things would be relatively adequately funded, and also millions of teachers that are operating under these same conditions. That impact, we've not seen this before, and so that could also cause some changes, but a lot has to happen in a short period of time.
Well,
Yeah,
go ahead, Kevin, please.
the one thing I was going to just sort of jump in here on to add to your point, Governor, is about that whole issue regarding the challenge for them when they come back to not necessarily, we'll see what happens on pressure on stimulus, but that whole effort to keep the government open, that sort of perennial debate happens, as you've mentioned. One of the issues that I think could be a positive opportunity when that occurs is in the ag appropriations bill is in fact the language that we're pushing for relative to on the school nutrition side, universal feeding, so that we can feed all kids the way we did in the spring. We know that Governor Pardue, Sonny Pardue, who's the Secretary of Ag, is generally in favor of this. He has been pushing real hard that he wants congressional backing of this. He wants their action. There are a lot of people who think he could act unilaterally if he wanted to again, but he's basically kind of shoving that off and saying, I want to see congressional action. So it is in the ag appropriations bill. It is one of the pieces of undone business that would have to be tackled in that effort to keep the government running. So there are two different major tracks politically. There's all the politics around stimulus, all the politics around those sets of bills that you talked about, those big appropriation bills. One way or another, we're hoping to get the ag issue, the school lunch issue, school meal issue dealt with when they do return.
You make a good point. I learned in 18 years of serving in the Congress a couple of things. One is you never want to close the government down 4 weeks before a presidential and national election. That's not good business. It's not smart. And the second thing, to your point on the appropriations bill, Kevin, is the appropriation bills do provide that opportunity to include a lot of things that people think are important. And so I sometimes look at appropriation bills as being a pinata that you can fill up. And so in with some very worthwhile items such as you're discussing and some others not as much. But so yes, you can see some, it is possible that you could see some of what we're talking about, including in the appropriation bills. But let's be clear, people are going to have to be clear that they want this, because members of Congress have to go back in an appropriations bill like that and specifically ask and push to make sure it's inserted.
I like the pinata analogy. When I think about a lot of goodies being out there and people standing around with clubs, it is the perfect picture of the U.S. Capitol building when when the stakes get really high.
Well, I want to say, I'm sure that there's a lot of echo to this, but I just cannot believe that we haven't seen anything additional since that initial 13 billion. And you look at the other industries and all the dollars that they got to bail out, and here we are, unprecedented change, unprecedented spending needed to adapt to that change, and the lack of action is quite frustrating. So I would hope that the folks that have the power to do this would, do what they can in that short 3 weeks, as you alluded to, Governor Wise,
What they need to,
to help.
particularly what they need to hear, Tim, is today marked the 100th day that the stock market has been increased. It's the single greatest increase over 100 days since the Great Depression. What they need to hear is what's happening on Wall Street is not what's happening on Main Street or any other street in this country. And that I do think that what could put the pressure on for a significant stimulus package, particularly before a presidential election year, is this fact of hearing and seeing firsthand we're not out of this by any means. This pandemic goes on. The number of COVID cases in schools has rapidly been increasing. And while there's been some overall easing, this is continuing, and a lot more needs to be done by the Congress.
Yeah. One of the things that I think happened in the political dynamics here is that the Trump administration, either by design, but more likely by accident, really won the day politically in the way they played this, particularly with the president's four executive orders that have the appearance of doing something when I'm not really sure how much meaning there is there. The president's actions today with regard to a big supply of masks for schools, the appearance of doing for schools that, by the way, has almost no impact on California because everything he's doing that's along the line of education is tilted entirely to only the schools that completely reopen. And obviously, we don't think that's good public policy here in California. We're trying to be careful about this. But politically, I think the Democrats dropped the ball in not having a real game plan of messaging if, in fact, the Republicans and the presidents didn't end up blinking, and they didn't blink. And I think messaging wise, that idea that where Republicans started out, like, for example, on unemployment at $200 a week, thinking that that's just fine for a bunch of billionaires and millionaires in Congress to have that kind of flip attitude about people in need, there was an opportunity that Democrats lost their footing on. Now, the president obviously did come up to the $400 mark. And now what it makes it look like is are Democrats the problem, not Republicans, because the president wants to get that money out the door.
The president did come up to the $400 mark, but let's remember that he came up because he doesn't have the authority to do all of it as federal. So the state has to bear 25% of that. And most states have borrowed heavily, and I think California has borrowed heavily already to make the existing unemployment. And now they have to go in a time when they're already suffering deficits across the board. They have to go in and find even more if they're going to match that. And the question, so you're absolutely correct, Kevin, in your analysis. And the question is whether some of this becomes apparent, and the reality becomes apparent in time for the Congress to act before the election.
Right. And Governor Newsom, to your point, did make an announcement about the fact that they don't have the money to make good on that promise, and that we can't be funded in arrears on this. We've got to get Congress to act in order to provide that money so that we can afford to get it out to people, that California doesn't have the resources to make good on that. And that's part of that political sort of brinksmanship where the president does something and makes it look like he's done something meaningful for average folks that are dependent on that money. And then it's the state or people like Gavin Newsom that have to say, I wish I could make it happen, but I can't. And who ends up looking like the bad guy and who looks like the good guy? It's always about this kind of politics, and it's too bad. But anyway, so yeah, really big challenges ahead of us. We hope they'll do the right thing, as you've mentioned, Tim, for sure, and really great observations.
Well, thanks for sharing, both of you. And I guess the scary part is we've heard states say we need the federal government to help us here. Otherwise, we don't know how we're going to continue. Like, we don't know what sort of cuts we're going to have to make. And in California, we have all these plans for deferrals that we talked about several times on this broadcast. But one of the things is, like, let's just say there is no stimulus, unfortunate as it may sound. What are the implications of that for California and other states? And maybe Governor Wise, you'd like to start there.
Well, actually, I'm going to defer to Kevin, who's explained deferrals so well over past ones. I will just note this: if I were a district leader right now, what does all this, what we're talking about, the back and forth, who did what to whom mean to a district leader. What it means right now is you can't expect any additional funds beyond what you've been told by the state, either through the original CARES Act or through what the state is providing. And so you may, and Kevin has spoken about that, you may be able to get to this next semester, this next year. But what concerns me is you're not able to plan for the future. You're not able to make any reasonable expenditures beyond what your very narrow budget. And so right now, the district leader, I think, is on hold and does not have a lot to look forward to until the Congress acts. So, Kevin, I'm turning over to you because you're the master of deferrals.
No, I really appreciate that. And that is the big consequence for California public schools is that, and the governor did win in his approach to putting this budget together, which did not assume we were going to get that federal aid. Now, in hindsight, a very smart move on the part of the governor in terms of fiscal prudence. He assumed they would not act. The budget's predicated on that. And in fact, if we had gotten that fifth round of stimulus, it would have a direct effect on lowering the amount of deferrals we would be doing for public schools in California. So the schedule of deferrals, they're big ones that are on tap for public schools in the coming year, moves forward as is. They're very big numbers. We're hoping that if at some point Congress and the president act, we'll be able to carve that number back down, but we'll see what happens till then. Fortunately, there are not other kinds of cuts that are attached to the inaction of Congress. Right now, it's really pretty much all about deferrals. So those are the biggest implications. And Bob did a great job of outlining those other implications, like, for example, the issue regarding the dollars that might otherwise go to private schools. Those rules have not been reversed, which we were hoping to attach to a stimulus package of trying to back DeVos down on that equity of access issue. And then there were some of these other issues that we were looking at trying to attach to a stimulus package, get some other public policy goals done. Those are the implications of what's not done. And we kind of covered a good deal of that already.
Thanks, Kevin. And another, just switching gears a little bit, also DC focused is, Biden picked his VP, running mate this year, and pretty big news story this week. So, Governor Wise, maybe you could start us there with some of your thoughts on that.
I think that, I think that Senator Harris is a good addition to the ticket. I think the two will complement each other very well. Certainly, she's got a record on education, a number of other issues. And just from my personal standpoint, and this is also true of the Vice President Pence, I always like somebody on that ticket that has state and local government experience because the federal government interacts and should be interacting regularly, and so much happens at the state and local government. But I'm going to turn it over to you all because Senator Harris obviously is a Californian, and what do you all think?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. And just, there are partners in our firm, particularly Jack O'Connell, that are very close to Kamala and have had a long-standing relationship with her as constitutional officers, her being the Attorney General and Jack being the State Superintendent of Public Instruction. And I've been with them both together in meetings that we've had. She's been really accommodating on the education issues that we've brought to her in the U.S. Senate, and doesn't seem to ever be afraid of a real fight when it comes to the issues that we care about. So all of that's good. I honestly was surprised again that it ended up shaping out this way. And when Joe Biden said that he was going to end up picking a woman for sure as his running mate, it changed the political calculus that I was making at the time, which was that if you're going to make a choice that you think helps to shore up the votes of African American voters in the United States, across this country, and you were going to be looking for votes from the states that Hillary Clinton lost, that it seemed to me that the pick of a Kamala Harris didn't make a lot of sense because we thought African American voters were already going to be on the Democrat side of the column, and that California certainly was going to be a state that Biden would win. So what's the utility of that pick? What it really came down to, who's got the experience of running in major statewide elections, and California being like a nation state, she's won 3 big statewide elections. She knows how to campaign. There's that personality characteristic that she has that I think is exciting to a lot of voters, and Biden needs that ingredient on the ticket. And so for all of those reasons, and just sort of being, checking the box on the main, more generic criteria, you can't discount her personality and her aggressiveness, how articulate she is, and just about delivering the message. And that's why I think she's going to be good. The real issue for us, and the reason why I thought it was an interesting thing for us to talk about, are the politics in California about what happens if she ends up winning the vice presidency. This ticket wins the White House back. What then happens for Gavin Newsom? Gavin Newsom, who we think there's no secret has White House ambitions, ends up now looking at that as a very long-term strategy with a Biden-Harris ticket in Washington, D.C. in the White House. It could be a very long time before an opportunity gets raised for a Gavin Newsom. So he has to sort of rethink what his political steps would be. But first out of the box is that he gets to pick the next United States senator from California. It's a big and powerful kind of political thing that governors have to be able to make that selection. And I wouldn't discount the possibility that on his list of potential successors could be Gavin Newsom. I sort of doubt it, but he could put together an arrangement where he ends up taking that seat and Lieutenant Governor Eleni Kounalakis ends up becoming governor. But, we're talking about all kinds of different scenarios that could happen. I think the most likely one is that you get Alex Padilla, the current Secretary of State, or our Attorney General, Javier Becerra, that end up getting tapped for this because it gives the governor sort of two bites of the apple. He gets to make a major play on a major position, the United States Senate, someone that he cares about, but then he gets another appointment to a major constitutional officer if he appoints either the Secretary of State or the Attorney General. He gets to do two major appointments of folks that he would hope to be loyalists and people that work well with him to be in those different posts. So I see those kind of the politics of this as it shakes out. It'll be really, really fun to watch just, from the standpoint of someone that loves these politics. But interesting pick. I think the vice president did a good thing by picking Kamala Harris in terms of his strategy. Once he boiled down to the idea that he was going to have a woman be on the ticket with him.
Well, thanks for that, Kevin. And yeah, lots of potential changes there if that does take place. So thanks for your knowledge on that. One thing I want to jump into on the tech side, Governor Whiten alluded to earlier. In California, we have a lot of school districts that are either going back to school starting tomorrow or next week. And I was asked, and many of you may know this, so I don't want to, tell you something you already know, but I think it's important to call out. I was asked by two separate districts this week to come in and do a little bit of a pep talk about technology and about this massive shift that they're about to undergo, and really start to address the mindset of your team around this reopening. And we talked a little bit about it last week, but I just want to say, a bit of a mindset of give yourself the grace. We need that there's going to be some turbulence, some bumps in the road, and make sure that you're messaging early and often that you expect those bumps. You're not excited about them, you expect them, and you're going to put measures in place to take care of those. And as you progress through the year, things are going to improve. With that mindset, you are going to be able to communicate and set better expectations of your community, your staff, your students, your board, and folks are going to have ease a little bit of that tension that everyone's feeling right now about this reopening and distance learning. I also want to make sure to remind people that while we are isolated, we are not alone. And one of the districts, it was a rather small district, had 100 staff on this webinar. And, that's 100 opportunities, folks using all the same software. If you find something that works for you to solve a problem, it's your opportunity to share that solution with others and really ease, again, someone's tension. When they hit that same challenge, they're going to be able to use the solution you provided. Lean on each other, lean on your associations who are working hard to support you now. And again, have the sort of mindset that you expect some of these bumps, and you're going to learn as you go and get better as the school year goes on. Absolutely, this is more of a mindset thing, but technology involves humans, and we have to deal with that human side of tech to get this right and to have the best outcomes we can have this year with the current circumstances. So with that in mind, I just wanted to jump in there. We will put a little link to, I thought, a wonderful piece that San Diego County Office of Ed came out with this week, 9 steps to surviving this reopening for yourself, your families, your communities. We're going to put that link in the email that goes out to Capital Advisors clients. We're sending it out to our clients as well. And we're going to put in the link under the YouTube channel. So make sure you look for that. With that, Kevin, I want to turn it over back to you because speaking of coming back to school, we need to be able to account for things. There's state audits. We talked about this the last couple of weeks. Can you give us the latest on the audit standard issues and what we're hearing so far?
Yeah. So there have been some recent meetings where I know that the Department of Finance and the California Department of Education, who are going to be mostly responsible uh, for working with the controller's office on what will ultimately become audit guide language that'll be followed by the independent outside auditors across the state. We've been working on this. I think I touched on this in some of our earlier broadcasts about the importance of making sure that what goes into that audit guide is a fair representation of what we should expect from school districts. That we don't get ourselves in a situation where school districts are set up for failure because we didn't get that part right. And there's definitely a spirit of interest and cooperation by all those different entities. Capital Advisors helped host some meetings that we had with the controller early on, and we're reaching out to the Department of Ed and Department of Finance on this. There's a lot that we've got to do as we close up the end of session that's dominating their attention at the moment, but their attention is going to turn very significantly to this issue in the coming weeks. And there seems to be a real interest in collaboration. Jerry Shelton, one of our founding partners, is kind of helping to especially because of the experience he's had in this very issue, is helping to lead some of the conversation on this and bring people together around kind of a sensible approach on this. So I want people to know that there's no need to be afraid of what's going to be in that audit guide. You can count that AXA and CASBO and CSBA are all part of the groups that are coming together to sit at the table to give advice to those that are help formulating this stuff so that we get this audit guide right. We have the right expectations, and we're revising the legislature about any tweaks or changes that might be needed if we think what's required by statute that's supposed to be audited maybe isn't practical in terms of what their expectations are. So we're going to be working with all those different parties to try to get this right. That's just begun with some of those initial meetings this week, and we're real excited about the prospect to help out on this going forward.
Thanks, Kevin. And I'll just say, just want to remind everyone, when we've spoken about this in the past, we talked about the tools that you use, the importance of choosing the right tools. And if you're going to have to demonstrate that you made a connection with someone, some tools are more capable, make that easier for you to show that you made that connection. And that might not have been part of your criteria before when you onboarded a new tool. But if you have to switch gears because you're having challenges and you need to add something, make sure that that data collection is a component of those tools that you add into your arsenal, and make your lives a little bit easier, because we know we're going to have to show some form of proof that we made these connections. And with that, Kevin, I want to jump over to liability issues. Can you jump into that? I know we talked a little bit about that, but what's the latest there?
So AB 1384 is the bill that Chairman O'Donnell of the Education Committee in the Assembly has authored and is pushing forward. The principal co-author is Senator Rubio in the state Senate. The main goal, first of all, we've talked about this issue before, is getting this really important liability legislation that would help us in public school agencies across the state with regard to any liability relative to COVID, get some relief from that potential liability. There are a lot of folks who would probably sue at the drop of a hat for things that an LEA just simply would not be responsible for. So we want that protection. In going forward, that legislation needs to be heard by the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's chaired by Hannah Beth Jackson, a senator from the Central Coast. And Hannah Beth had a really good meeting with some of her constituents on this issue, educators that came and kind of rolled everything out. It seems to be that some determination that it may not be given a hearing because the legislature wants to only hear, a very pared back schedule of bills. They've got one hearing opportunity next Tuesday before they close things down, with only 3 weeks to go in the legislative process. We need to have this bill heard in that hearing. So today, a letter signed by more than 40 legislators from the Senate and the Assembly, and I think as many as 12 or 13 state senators, was delivered to Chairman Hannah Beth Jackson of that Judiciary Committee to try to implore her to hear the bill. So we'll see what kind of influence that may have, and we're hoping that that bill gets heard. This is also a side issue at the federal level that we'd hoped would be introduced into those negotiations that Bob and I were talking about in Washington, D.C. over stimulus. That's yet another issue that gets sidetracked because they didn't do it. and we probably would have heard a lot more about that. It's a very high priority for Senate Republicans and the White House, this liability issue, mostly for business, but they always, in that sentence, always include schools and the concern over liability for schools when they talk about some of that liability relief. So we'll see where this goes in the coming week. If Tuesdays comes and goes without a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee of the state Senate, I think we're pretty much done for this year, and it'll be an argument we're going to have to actually extend into the coming year when there's a brand new legislative session. So that's the update on that issue.
Thanks, Kevin. And Governor Wise, I don't know if you had anything to add there, a little bit of a DC component, but if Kevin covered it, we're okay. I just wanted to give you the
Kevin
opportunity.
covered it very well.
Great.
And that issue.
As always. So Kevin, when we think about ADA growth, that's been an issue for districts that are, like, have that good problem, but it's normally a good problem. Now it's actually a little bit of a sticky problem. What can you talk to us about the latest there?
Right. And so there is some language gelling finally between the Department of Finance and legislative staff over addressing this ADA growth issue. As most people know, there was this hold harmless where more than half of California's public school districts needed and wanted to make sure that we had essentially the funding for next year stabilized. We could count on it, even if you were going to have a reduction in the number of students you might otherwise have in terms of ADA, because parents were reticent about sending their kids to school, or we might lose kids to some private schools, or in migrant communities where kids go home. A lot of different reasons that would affect ADA. The legislature stepped up with the governor and said, let's do a hold harmless provision. It ends up being more more of an ADA freeze than a hold harmless position. And as a result, that creates problems because there is harm that's done to the districts that have some level of growth between February 29th, when they kind of snap that chalk line. We've got to deal with this growth issue because school districts are going to be having an onslaught of kids that they're not going to get paid for, and there's going to be financial burden that they're going to face if we don't deal with that. There seems to be a consensus building around trying to help. It's limited, though, and I think the term planned growth is something people need to get used to. And that is, I think there's going to be quite a premium put on what kind of growth did you anticipate in the adopted budget for your LEA for the fall. And if you've got those numbers justified in that budget, you're going to be in good shape. I think there may very likely be other characteristics that'll be added to this, but we haven't seen that language yet. But I did want to let people know that they really are working on trying to get some solution to that particular problem. We do have also some cases where charter schools have actually closed, and that ADA has then gotten folded into the regular district ADA. And under what was the existing law, without any kind of changes, those districts would be in trouble. It appears they're addressing that issue very well, in addition to some of the other ADA issues that we're looking at. So again, look for that to be in a trailer bill language. It would be follow-up amendments to what was already adopted in SB 98.
Thanks, Kevin. Our final point here is about Williams, and we know how this has been something that districts have been really kind of dealing with, especially when we think about in terms of technology access. Can you talk to us a little bit about Williams compliance and how that's coming up lately and some of the concerns there?
Yeah, this is one of those issues, Tim, that you've always raised, as that Williams is almost an archaic yardstick of, are we doing good by all of our kids when it comes to equity and access? And that when you have something, for example, that puts a premium on, does every kid have the textbook, when we have now, particularly in a COVID environment, accelerated rapidly into an issue of whether you have access, connectivity devices to the internet and to computing technology that we have. That's really become the bigger issue, but it is nowhere, embedded in what we're doing relative to Williams. There needs to be changes. Well, what we've heard is that the near-term problem is the issue of accountability on Williams, and that is that there are inspections that are done. They're usually done on site. That simply can't happen right now, and there's work being done in the legislature, and we're fairly optimistic that almost all sides now have signed off on the idea that we are going to do some extensions. So we can expect that probably very soon to be announced, that in-person, site-by-site kind of work does not need to be done we need an answer to that soon, because they've got an obligation to actually achieve those inspections within 4 weeks of the opening of school and schools opening. So the legislature needs to act, quicker on that than slower and get that done. We wished it was actually done already, but we know that it's coming. So there's that part of it. Then there's the longer term reform to Williams that does need to happen, and it needs to happen in partnership with our folks in the equity community, the folks that have been fighting, in fact, for what was embodied in Williams, but also with the major statewide associations to make sure that we do something that's sensible and really more aligned with what the accountability system is today and what expectations really ought to be about what we're ensuring that is provided for all kids. So that, we understand, is probably going to get pushed into the next year's legislative cycle, which will be a brand new 2-year legislative session.
Thanks, Kevin. And I want to just add something that I think that's very important here is, everyone, again, you have to worry about just getting connected to people first. That's priority one. But what you're calling out, folks who are differently abled are going to have a different set of challenges in learning from home. And when you think about the applications that you've chosen, some are more compliant and lend themselves to that than others. If you haven't really considered that, you really need to be thinking about those students. You may have found connectivity for them, but if the applications that you're using do not serve that purpose, let's say the websites don't necessarily translate. It's streaming video, but they're not getting the support that they need to do. It might be sight or hearing, and it even could be your website itself and how you're delivering information. So the tools you use, certainly the hardware, most importantly the software, are very important choices these days. And when this distance learning thing isn't going away anytime soon. Vaccine comes out in 3 months. It doesn't mean we're all back in 3 months. So get ready for the long run. And to me, this is one of those gotchas that pops up. We got connectivity and now we're missing X, Y, and Z. This is one of the first things that's going to pop up. And as you said, Kevin, that legislation piece, this is going to be a big issue as we move on. Again, I want to point out that there are some resources out there. Actually, KQED has a really nice resource about disabilities with distance learning. I hadn't intended on bringing that up, but since you brought up the Williams compliance, maybe we'll go ahead and add that link as well. And with that, that was my final point. And I didn't know, Kevin, did you have anything to pile on there? But
No.
kind of took us in a little bit different direction.
Super great points. I mean, I think one of the things to reinforce, Tim, about what you're saying is that when we look to reform of Williams next year, expect it not to be something that's simple. I mean, it's going to be complicated, but it's going to point to the disparity amongst different kinds of applications in terms of their accessibility, and that we're going to be vetting apps more stringently in the future. Thank goodness there's no accountability right now while we get a chance to learn this stuff. But in the future, there are going to be probably more stringent sort of guidelines about those choices that you're going to make in terms of ensuring that for language, for hearing, for sight impaired people, for all of those kinds of things, that we're making choices that can actually enable equal educational opportunity for all kids. And it doesn't mean that one app can't be used. It means you better have an answer for all kids in terms of whatever it is we're trying to convey educationally to them.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And with that, I just want to offer Governor Wise, I don't know if you have any final thoughts for us here before we wrap up. I just want to give you an opportunity for any final thoughts.
Actually, I do. First of all, I was very struck by your message that district leaders and educators, you're not alone. Do not, anytime you're in turbulence, you're in triage, but you're moving steadily towards transformation, and don't be afraid to reach out. And in fact, some of the tools that you've been forced to use now, distance learning, Zoom meetings and WebExes and so on, some of these tools can now be a means of reaching out. The second message follows right up on that is, I was struck, Tim, if you were on a video conference call with 100 educators, then I would encourage that district to invite their local representative, their congressperson, the representative from the senator's office, to participate in that call as well, because you only have to do 2 or 3 of those, and I think representatives are going to quickly see how important it is to get something done either before the August recess is over, because they can be called back, or immediately thereafter.
Oh, thank you, Governor Wise. Appreciate that. And again, you make a great point. if there is even a sliver of hope to get some sort of help here in that 3-week window, if we really make a push and make another advocacy push, we say it a lot, squeak the wheel, and let's see what sort of help we can get. So thank you for being here, and thank you for your support. And Kevin, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Nope, I think we're done. We went a little long, but we covered a lot of territory today.
Absolutely. So I'll just remind everybody, please help us spread the word about this. Subscribe, click the little bell, make sure you get notified. Share with your colleagues, share with your team. I think there's a lot of wonderful information here that people need, and we could definitely use your help in spreading the word. So thanks for watching this. Boost us on social media. And at the very end, we'll have our social media handles. And if you need anything or you have some questions, please let us know. We'd be happy to try to answer them on a future broadcast. With that, everybody be safe. Good luck opening school, and we'll be talking soon.